Hello and welcome to this session discussing Azure Consistent Billing with Microsoft Azure Stack. My name is David Knappett and I'm an architect with Microsoft Services. The agenda for this module is first to review how billing for the consumption model, also known as the pay-as-you-use model, works in Azure, and then how that relates to and works with Azure Stack, as opposed to the capacity model in Azure Stack. Then some specific details for multi-tenant service providers, and finally how to get access to and review the usage data. So first, let's review billing based on consumption for Azure. With the consumption model, the process is summarized as follows. The first step in Azure is to sign up for an offer. When the user signs up for an offer, be it a free trial, pay-as-you-go, MSDN, etc., the user gets a subscription ID. As the user consumes resources, for example, creates and runs a virtual machine, Azure logs the consumption in records called meters. Meters are tagged with the subscription ID of the user. The subscription ID is what keeps track of who the user was. These meters are then processed by Azure Commerce and multiplies the unit cost by the quantity consumed, and then sends the bill to the customer. With the Cloud Solution Provider program, the process is as follows. The partner creates a subscription instead for the tenant. The user consumes resources, which is logged by Azure, and the meters are processed by Azure Commerce as before, but this time the CSP partner gets the bill with the breakdown for each tenant, and it's up to the CSP to process the detail and bill the tenant. So how does this process work for Azure Stack? These points here will be familiar, as it's the same for end customers with an additional step for Azure Stack, and the key differences are underlined. So a user subscribes to an Azure Stack offer and gets an Azure Stack subscription ID. Azure Stack logs the consumption and the meters are tagged with the Azure Stack subscription ID. Azure Stack forwards these usage meters to Azure, and then as before the meters are processed by Azure Commerce and the customer gets the bill. It's important to remember that Azure Stack is a separate cloud with its own set of endpoints. This means that Azure Stack has its own subscriptions and usage meters which are different from and independent of the ones in Azure. So if you have a public Azure subscription, you cannot use it to work with Azure Stack. The ID will not be recognized, and the same is true of usage meter IDs. But with Azure Stack being an extension of Azure, it's designed and built to work with it, which is true of metering and billing too. And there is a usage pipeline which moves Azure Stack usage to Azure Commerce. When resources are consumed in Azure Stack, each of the resource providers for virtual machines, storage, etc. sends information to the usage service which stores data in a local database at least once an hour with who was using which resource, when, and for how long. The usage bridge then takes this information and sends it to the usage gateway, which is a service running in Azure. The usage gateway translates the data to Azure Commerce as usable data with which to bill. If the connection to Azure goes down or is unstable, the requirement is that Azure Stack must be able to report usage through a connection to Azure at least once every 30 days. There are a couple of steps to configure the end-to-end billing scenario. The prerequisites are that you have an Azure subscription from an enterprise agreement or cloud solution provider. For a multi-node system, these are the only types that can be used, and not an MSDN, free trial, or BizSpark subscription, as these can only be used with the Azure Stack Development Kit. Registration is really important for billing too. Registration is done as part of the OEM deployment process, and this connects the Azure Stack deployment with Azure Commerce and specifies which Azure subscription to bill to. Now we'll take a quick look at some specific details for multi-tenant service providers. To be able to support the multi-tenant service provider model specifically with CSP and Azure Stack, once Azure Stack has been registered, Microsoft needs to know that you'll be using it this way in order to apply another tag, and so as a one-time task, an email needs to be sent to azstcsp@microsoft.com with the registration name, resource group, and the subscription ID of the Azure subscription used to register Azure Stack, and then Microsoft will confirm that this is complete. We saw a simplified version of this slide earlier, but here is a look at the Azure Stack usage pipeline for CSPs in a bit more detail. The CSP partner starts by creating an Azure subscription for the tenant, which is just the same as the standard process in Partner Center. The Azure Stack operator, in this case the CSP partner, goes through a process to onboard the tenant to Azure Stack. A local Azure Stack subscription is then created as usual by either the tenant subscribing to an offer or a subscription being assigned by the operator. Importantly here, the CSP partner needs to add the tenant subscription to their registration of Azure Stack. This essentially tags the registration to ensure that each customer's usage is reported under that customer's individual CSP subscription, making tracking usage and billing easier. The documentation for this process can be found in the link at the bottom of this slide. The other steps are as before, in that once the user consumes resources, the meters are processed by Azure Commerce, and the CSP partner gets the bill with the breakdown for each tenant, and it's up to the CSP to process the detail and bill the tenant. Let's take a look at how we can view this data and what it looks like. There are a few different methods and places where we can get usage data. We have the Azure Account Portal and Partner Center. We have the Azure reconciliation files. We can use the Azure and Azure Stack usage APIs. And there is also a PowerShell script that makes it easy to get this information from the Azure Stack usage APIs into a CSV file. Let's look at these in a bit more detail. For portals, CSPs use the consumption and invoice processes in Partner Center, which will be familiar. For those enterprises with Azure Stack registered with an enterprise agreement, they will see their Azure Stack consumption there. And if Azure Stack has been registered with a pay-as-you-go type of subscription, you will also see this consumption in Azure Account Center. For CSPs, you can get detailed usage data by downloading the reconciliation file from Partner Center, and crucially, the additional info field contains the Azure Stack subscription ID for identifying the correct user. Programmatically, there are two routes to get usage data. If you need access to the data as it is billed by Azure, you can use the Azure Commerce APIs. But if you need access to the data directly from Azure Stack to view some different meters or gain insights before billing data is available, you can query the APIs built into Azure Stack. So what data is available? Here are some examples of the meters for Azure Stack usage that will be seen in Azure Commerce and reconciliation files. The resource names for meters here containing the word admin are used to report the usage of infrastructure resources, for example, the virtual machines used to run the Azure Stack portal and resource providers. These meters will always be priced at $0, and the remaining meters are used to charge full price. So now if we take a look at the local meters within Azure Stack, we see that there are many more with a lot more information we can use to gain deeper insights. The reason for this is that only certain meters are charged for by Microsoft as part of running Azure Stack in a consumption model, but service providers, for example, may wish to charge customers on a different set of metrics, and so these are here to provide that flexibility. There are many listed here for storage and public IP address usage. And on the next slide, there are more here for virtual machines, Key Vault, and the additional resource providers. This detailed information can then also enable custom billing adapters to be made, or to use an alternative storefront to help integrate Azure Stack into existing business processes. And this has also led to the creation of some third-party metering and billing products from Exivity and CloudAssert, who have created add-on tools that can manage consumption and billing in Azure Stack as well as Azure. Finally, we'll cover accessing this usage data programmatically, starting with a sample API call. Here is the URI that can be used to make a call to the API. A few details need to be changed here, such as the ARM endpoint for the admin side of your Azure Stack deployment, the admin sub ID, which is the subscription ID of the default provider subscription, and then enter values for the reported start time and reported end time in a valid date time format, the aggregation granularity, either hourly or daily, and the tenant subscription ID for which to get usage. And once you've made the API call, you will get back the information in JSON format as shown here. In the Properties section, we get the subscription ID for this usage data, the resource that incurred the usage, in this case a storage account, the time and date that this resource was used, the meter name, the quantity of units the resource used, and then any additional information. You can also use PowerShell to access this usage data, which will helpfully export the data into a CSV file to make working with it a bit easier. This comes included in the Azure Stack tools, which is available for download from GitHub, and you can find it in the usage folder. And that brings to an end this session on Azure Consistent Billing with Microsoft Azure Stack, which I hope has been useful. Thank you very much.